Now, aside from a business decision, that where other countries might say, you know, we just can't keep lending you money, especially at these low interest rates. Either the interest rates have got to go up a lot, which is going to be very damaging to our economy, or we can't lend you money because it's not a good business decision. The other problem is there's a lot of countries that just don't share our point of view and really don't want to be helpful to us. And the United States has a very unique role in the world. There are problems everywhere. And the United States has got to take a lead in addressing these problems, and there's almost nothing that we can't do without the cooperation of other nations. You know, just to name a few, we've got the threat of nuclear proliferation in North Korea as well as Iran. We really don't want either of those countries to have nuclear weapons. We've got an ongoing problem with Israel and its surrounding neighbors. It's been a perpetual hotspot. We've got wars in Afghanistan, we've got wars in Iraq, we've got an OPEC problem that's an ongoing thing that needs to be managed by the world community. There are just a range, and incidentally, you know, you look at China and Taiwan. If China felt that they could get away with it, they'd gobble up Taiwan in a month. They wanted to do it for a long time. It's only a strong United States that keeps that from happening. Now, what we've done by borrowing this much is we've actually put control of our oxygen supply in the hands of our foreign creditors. Because we're slowly bleeding in Afghanistan and Iraq, and all these other nations are just happy to see us do it. You know, do you know that in Afghanistan, the fully burdened cost of fuel to military vehicles is $400 per gallon? Is that astonishing? I mean, you don't need to know anything else than that statistic to know we just can't be there. You know, we can't afford to be there. $400 a gallon for gasoline? So there are countries in the world that would love to see us stumble, and to the extent that they decide, we're not going to finance your debt. We put ourselves into this position. Now, the Roman Empire lasted almost 500 years. From when Julius Caesar came in about 36 BC to the late 400s, the Western Roman Empire lasted. And the Eastern Roman Empire lasted for 1,500 years. The British Empire lasted from the late 15th century to 1946, was when the British Empire truly ended. And does anybody know why the British Empire ended? What ended the British Empire? Okay. It was debt. This is something you're not going to hear from anybody else. They survived World War I. They survived the Nazis in World War II. What did in the British Empire was debt. And I'll tell you how it happened. First of all, Britain was in a very unusual circumstance. Having to fight 2 world wars that cost countless treasure and millions of lives within a 35-year period was hard enough. In the intervening years, they were never able to let their guard down, because no sooner had World War I ended, but Germany was starting to ramp up again. So they had to spend in ways that nobody could have anticipated. By 1946, the British Empire was on the verge of becoming insolvent, and they needed to borrow $5 billion. A nice, quaint little number compared to the 12 trillion that we're currently borrowing. They needed $5 billion, and they came to their old pal, the United States, and said, what we would like is a zero-interest loan payable back over 50 years. President Truman was the president at the time, and America said, no, we're not going to do that. And Britain, not being in a position to take no for an answer, was insistent. And so what America decided to do was lend them $3.7 billion rather than $5 billion, and at 2% interest rather than 0% interest. And I didn't see you come in, Tiffany. And the other terms were actually what ended the British Empire. The first was that Britain would agree to the Bretton Woods provisions, which would effectively make the United States the dominant currency of the world, and the British pound sterling would float against the dollar. And secondly, that Britain would agree to drop all duties and tariffs throughout the British Empire. And taken together, these moves ended the British Empire. By 1948, 2 years later, they pulled out of India, and they were well on their way to decolonizing all of their assets in Africa as well as in Asia, with the exception of Hong Kong. That's what debt does. And I know I don't need to connect the rest of the dots. We owe China over $1 trillion right now. Over the next 10 years, we're certainly going to be expecting that they'll take a reasonable amount of that 9 trillion or more that we're going to need to borrow. At some point, China will do to us exactly what we did to Britain. And incidentally, the Chinese economy will be bigger than the American economy by the year 2030. But when that happens, when Uncle Sam comes and says, we need more money, you know, and we're hooked on it. We're hooked on it like a drug right now. They're going to say, sure, America, we'll be happy to help you. But these are our terms. We're not going to like those terms when that happens. So we've got to retrace our steps. We have no choice but to try and find a way. If we were able to run our government at this level back in 1980 in real dollars, we've got to somehow find a way back down that path. And there's a lot of easy ways that we can cut, and it really starts at the top. Every organization takes its behavioral cues from its leaders. You know, if the president of the company goes home at 5 o'clock, then the parking lot's going to be empty at 5:15. And if the president of the company throws a $4 million birthday party in Corsica for his wife, like the Tango did a few years ago, then you can bet that nobody's going to be worrying about saving paper clips. They'll say, hey, it's only shareholder money. We got lots of shareholder money, and they start wasting it. And so it is with the government. We have 1.9 million federal non-military employees. Now, when the government organization sees that the president is living like a king and he wants to go take a date night in Manhattan and see a Broadway play with his wife, and do you know how many millions of dollars it takes to move the president for a date night? I mean, think about it. It's millions of dollars. You got to get those armored limousines onto the C-5 transports and fire up Air Force One and a couple of platoons of Marines and Secret Service and White House communications all got to go down weeks in advance, and they've all got to be put up. A date night in New York is millions of dollars. How many taxpayers have to work a whole year to do that? So there's an example that says, I'm so important that, and Obama's not the first guy to do this either. I'm picking on him because he's the guy that's in there. But then the Congress sees this and they go, hey, we're special too. Do you know what the worst recession we've had in 80 years, this year, Congress voted itself $550 million to upgrade their fleet of private aircraft. I remember when I used to see congressmen on airplanes with me. And now they've got private aircraft, and those aircraft aren't good enough. We've got to pay $500 million so they have better aircraft. The other thing that they did this year was they each voted themselves a $93,000 increase to their petty cash fund. Now, whatever the petty cash fund was before, it's now $50 million greater because there's 435 members of the House of Representatives and there's 100 senators. You multiply 535 times 93,000, it's $50 million that goes to petty cash. And petty cash basically it's just too trivial for us to keep track of. I mean, in a business, every single thing has a general ledger item. Office supplies, toilet paper, however trivial it is, it's kept track of. Petty cash is just, we can't keep track of it. It's the pennies. And to say we need $50 million more of these pennies is really insulting. And so it goes through the whole organization. You know, waste and fraud becomes a force multiplier.